In this video, we'll go ahead and migrate an enterprise phone over to MPP using Cloud Upgrader, and this will be onboarded to WebEx Calling. One of the things that I've done off camera is I've run the firmware migration task tool for this phone in WebEx Calling. This will give us two items. One is it's going to generate a firmware migration license for this phone, and number two, once the phone migrates, the phone will be able to onboard to a specific user. So let's go ahead and take a look at the current phone's firmware. Okay, this phone does have older enterprise firmware, 12.8.1 firmware. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set the alternate TFTP. So we're going to go to Admin Settings. We're going to go to Ethernet Setup. We're going to go down to, so I already had the alternate TFTP from earlier testing I was doing on. So basically we're just going to go on. So what I'm doing off camera is I'm going to upgrade.cisco.com. Top left corner, Enterprise to MPP for WebEx Calling, I'm clicking on. Then I'm going to scroll down to Migration Method, click on that, and then I'm going to select Manual Migration. And this is really focused for lab, proof of concept, several devices. In this case, I'm just doing one device, so perfect to use this method of firmware migration. And it tells us basically to press the Settings button, which is a gear button, then select Admin Settings, then Network Ethernet Setup, then IPv4 Setup. We're going to go ahead and turn on TFTP, alternate TFTP to on or yes, which I've done. And next for the TFTP server 1, we're going to type in the following IP address. So 3.14.211.49. Okay, so 3.14.211.49, we're going to hit apply. And before actually I hit apply, what I'm going to do is in Wireshark, I'm going to start the Wireshark conversations. We're going to click on the IPv4 tab, and I'm going to hit apply right now so we can in real time see what's happening. Okay, so if you notice, the phone is reaching out to 3.14.211.49. And the first thing the phone will need to do is, for an enterprise phone to migrate over to MPP firmware, the enterprise firmware must be at least 14.1.1 or higher. So in this case, we know the phone is at an earlier firmware version of enterprise, so first it's going to need to bump itself up to 14.1.1 or higher. And I believe in this case we're probably going to see like a 14.2. something firmware. And we'll take a look at it in a few moments once the phone ingests the firmware, reboots itself, before it does the next phase. So the next phase after that, once it's at the minimum 14.1.1 or higher firmware, the next phase will be the phone downloading the MPP firmware and migrating. So between these phases, I will go ahead and log in or go to the menu section so we can take a quick glance at the firmware to see exactly what's happening. But right now, as you can notice, the majority of the transactions is really with the 3.14.211.49 server in the cloud. If you're having issues migrating your phone, this obviously would be one of the first things you want to look at. This is assuming that the VLAN, the subnet the phone lives in, that everything is functioning from a DHCP standpoint. Also, DNS will become very, very critical here in a few moments because a lot of the transactions rely super heavily on DNS. Okay, if you notice, it says ready to upgrade, and the phone's going to go ahead and start its reboot here. It has a countdown timer. Each one of these phases typically I find takes about 4, 5, 6 minutes in general. And then a reboot is another minute and a half. This time can vary quite a bit if you have a fleet of phones that you're migrating. So that may be one consideration, is if there's limited bandwidth at the site where you're going to be migrating a good amount of phones, you may want to consider placing the binaries in a local TFTP. I do have some other videos I've created in past times where I go over how you can actually place binaries on a local TFTP and perform the firmware migration leveraging local resources. Okay. And we're going to take a look at the current firmware here. Okay, so it bumped up the enterprise firmware to 14.2.1. So the next step the phone's going to do, it's going to start downloading the MPP firmware now. So you can see it's going back to 3.14.211.49. And it's continuing that download. So right now we're at 111 megabytes of data downloaded, and it's every couple seconds the numbers are going upwards. As I was mentioning earlier, if you have a large fleet of phones and there's limited bandwidth, this process which I'm showing you today, generally this process for a single phone, if there's no contention on the internet access bandwidth at the location, generally I find it takes like 15 minutes plus or minus a few minutes for the phone from start to finish to complete the firmware migration. If there's bandwidth limitations, this can easily roll into half an hour, 45 minutes an hour, or multiple hours. So you definitely want to make considerations if you have a larger number of phones, doing them in smaller batches. Definitely when you first start off, try 1 or 2 phones to validate the process works at the site. And then you can add a couple additional phones as you're doing your batches. But you definitely want to be careful not to overcommit. We're doing so many phones that now the firmware migration period time takes so long that there's a risk if there's a power outage, internet outage, DHCP issues or something like that. If something goes south, it may be very difficult to recover if you have a large quantity of phones that have been interrupted in the middle of, okay, so the phone just rebooted. So right now, when the phone comes back up, it should be in MPP firmware. We should see the schema or the graphics on the phone look different. It'll basically be the MPP schema on the actual graphics on the phone versus what we normally may be accustomed to with the enterprise schema. And on our Wireshark, we should be seeing here in a few moments quite a lot of other cloud-based addresses that the phone will start communications with. So for the firmware updating or migrating, if you will, cloud upgrader, it's primarily 3.14.211.49. So that we need to make sure if we have tight firewall rules that's allowed. But in a few moments you're going to see quite a long list of other resources the phone's going to start leveraging. One of the first things the phone's going to hit now or reach will be EDOS, so it can get the onboarding instructions for WebEx calling. And let's take a quick look at the phone here as far as the firmware version. Okay, so it has 12.0.4 firmware. And notice the firmware ends with 101, so this is not SR1. As the recording of this video, the phone will get one additional bump up in the firmware, so it has 12.0.4.SR1. So we'll probably see that in a few moments here. One of the documents that's very critical to observe is going to be the WebEx Calling port usage document. It has quite a lot of information. Okay, as you're noticing, there's quite a lot of other resources the phone is contacting right now for the onboarding to WebEx Calling. But in any case, a lot of these resources we're seeing right now pop up on the screen that the phone is doing communications with, a lot of these resources will be listed on the WebEx Calling port usage document. So I'm going to go and scroll down a little bit. If you have an environment where the firewall rules are very tight, this will be something you'll need to spend some time analyzing the WebEx Calling port usage document and understanding if you're having issues, what might be blocked or not. An easy test is you can always take a phone to your home network, do this type of test like I'm showing here with Wireshark, and document exactly what TCP/UDP ports and what destinations the phone is reaching out to. And once you have the Wireshark capture, you can use that as a comparative analysis. So when you go back to your office network, you can go ahead and do another Wireshark capture, try to migrate another phone, and you can see how far in the process you're getting before things kind of halt, and figure out what is the phone trying to reach out to, and why are those packets not coming back. So if you notice, using the Wireshark conversations feature, it kind of gives us a dashboard of all the communications the phone is doing with the cloud. So in this case, the phone is object A and the cloud is object B. So generally, if I'm troubleshooting, what I like to look at is the packets coming from object B to object A, object B being the cloud. If we're seeing 0 packets coming back from the cloud, that's a pretty good indicator that that's being blocked, that traffic is being blocked at that point of time. So if you notice, all of my addresses I have in column B, which are public addresses, I think there's only one here towards the top that was RFC 1918. Yeah, so this all 10s, we can ignore that. That's RFC 1918. But everything else here is public routable IP addresses, and then this is just a broadcast for DHCP. So with the exception of those two, all of the other addresses here are actually routable public internet addresses. And if you notice, from column B to the column as packets B to A, which is from the cloud to the phone, all of those in my example do show activity as far as there's packets, with the exception of the 2 RFC 19 addresses I mentioned, the 10s and then the broadcast one here. So that would be kind of a tattletale sign. Okay, the phone is actually rebooted. It has actually an extension and a phone number. Before I do a test call, let's take a quick look at the firmware here and see what the firmware shows. Okay, so if you notice the firmware, it's 12.0.4, but then towards the end here it has 2.02. That indicates it's SR1. So this is the current firmware that the phone would have at the recording of this video, as far as what WebEx Calling is supporting for the phone firmware. Okay, so let's try to do a quick test call here. Testing, 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 testing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Testing. Okay. So this kind of shows from a firmware migration from enterprise firmware to 3PCC firmware, using the cloud upgrader to migrate a phone. Again, roughly 15 minutes plus or minus a few minutes is normally what I see. Let me actually go through the listing of IP addresses that the phone actually leveraged for the firmware migration. So right now I'm just kind of going from top to bottom. Here are my Wireshark capture of this WebEx firmware migration example. You can go ahead and stop the video at any point of time if you need to inspect specific IP addresses. Next, let's go to TCP. So this would be the different TCP ports and IP addresses that communications had occurred between the phone and the cloud. So we're just going to go down the list here. So if you need to analyze anything, you can go ahead and stop the video as needed. And what you'll notice is if you take a look at the WebEx calling port usage document, it's fairly extensive. It lists a lot of different routable IP networks on the internet that need to be allowed from a firewall standpoint, if you will. And then also lists quite a lot of domains, because depending on what services the phone might be using, it may be based upon a domain name, or it may be based upon just a purely routable IP address subnet. And then we'll look at UDP. A lot of DNS transactions, as I mentioned. So it's very critical that DNS is functioning correctly, especially if you have any type of web content filtering devices. It is possible those could interfere also. And then towards the bottom here, this is when we did the test call here a few moments ago. So let me go back up. So again, you can stop the video at any point of time if you need to look at something specific here. Okay, so let's go back one more time to the IPv4. And we'll just go down this list one more time. Okay, well, hopefully this helps regarding firmware migration from enterprise to MPP, leveraging the cloud upgrader, and also this is actually being deployed on WebEx calling. A small note, as I mentioned earlier, is I had off camera already ran the firmware migration task within WebEx calling. If I had not done that, then the phone would have still migrated. However, what the result would have been is we would have got a licensing error. So that is one step that's very critical. If you do run into a licensing error issue, I have published some videos earlier. You can find on my channel as far as how to correct those with WebEx calling. In any case, thank you for watching. Hopefully this video helps you with the firmware migration workflow. If you run into any issues, what specific IP addresses, TCP/UDP ports are used by a phone during the firmware migration process. Thank you.